Hello everyone, welcome to another video on the Data Perspective channel. In our today's video, we'll be looking at Pandas DataFrame and Series objects. We'll be learning what a data frame and series object is, how to create it, and also how to access data in a data frame. So without wasting time, let's dive right into it. In our last class, we saw what a data frame looks like when we read in this CSV file. A data frame is a two-dimensional labeled data structure with columns of potentially different data type. When we say a two-dimensional data structure, it simply means a data frame is made up of columns and rows of data. It is similar to an Excel table or a SQL table. A data frame can be created manually from a dictionary. I'll go ahead and click on this notebook where I've written some piece of code which we'll be using for this tutorial. So if you take a look at this, you will see that this is a Python dictionary. Here we have the keys and a list containing values. These keys in our dictionary would represent our columns, while the list of values are going to represent our rows in our data sets. So let's go ahead and run this, and we would go ahead and convert this dictionary to a data frame, and we can do that using the Pandas DataFrame method. So we'll go ahead and first import Pandas. Let's import Pandas as PD, and let's run this. Okay, so our Pandas is being imported, and now let's go ahead and convert our dictionary to a data frame. So we'll say pd.data frame and pass the name of your dictionary, which is data. So ensure to take note of this, that for our data frame, the D and the F are both in capital letters. So now that we are done with this, we can go ahead and print out our DF and see what we'll get. Although small, you see that it's same structure just like our CSV file data frame, which we've read in our previous video. Okay, so this data frame contains 3 columns and 3 rows of data. Next, let's look at how to access information in our data frame. So first, let's just access the values of a single column, and to do that, it's very easy. So just like in Python dictionary where we can access the values by using their keys, we can also do that in our data frame. So to do that, we'll call on the name of our data frame using your square bracket and pass in the name of that column which you want to access. So for example, if we're accessing the name column, we'll have to pass in name into our square bracket and run this. So you see now we have just our name column. We have Alice, Bob, and Charlie, and this is what we have here: Alice, Bob, Charlie. When we access just one column in our data frame, just like what we did here, it returns us a series. So what we got here is a series of data, and we can go ahead and use the type method to confirm that information. So let's say type of our DF. Okay, so let's check this if what I said is true. If we go ahead and run this, you see we got the pandas.call.series. So you see that this data type here is a series. So what is a series? We can say a series is a one-dimensional labeled array that holds any data type. Or simply put, a series is rows of a single column of data in a data frame. So we can access a single column of data in our data frame just like what we did here, but we can also do that by using the dot notation. So you can either use the square bracket or say df dot, then you pass in the name of the column which you want. So let's run this. So you see we got same answer just like what we did using the square bracket method. So you can either make use of this square bracket method or make use of the dot notation method, since both will return same answer to you. But throughout this class, we'll be making use of the square bracket method. Next, let's say we want to access multiple columns in our data frame. In order to access multiple columns, we use the square bracket notation and pass in a list of the columns that we want. If we want to access the name and city column in our data frame, we can say df your square bracket, then you pass in a list, and you know list is made using square bracket also, right? And now the name of those columns which you want to access, a name, comma, city, and this is it. So let's go ahead and run this. Let me scroll this down a bit and now go ahead and run this. So you can see now that we have our names and our city returned to us. So endeavor to take note that we passed in a list containing the names of those columns which we needed into our square brackets to avoid getting errors when running your code. So this is how you can get multiple columns in your data frame. And take note that the data which is returned to us here is a data frame, not a series, unlike the previous one where we got only a single column of data. If you have a lot of columns names and you want to see all the names of your columns, you can use the dot columns attribute by saying df.columns, and if we go ahead and run this, we are going to get all the names of our columns returned inside a list. So you see we got name, age, and city. So now that we've seen how we can get single columns in our data frame and also multiple columns in our data frame, let's look at how we can get rows of data in our data frame. So we can do that using the loc and the iloc method. So loc for loc and iloc for iloc. First, let's take a look at the use of the iloc method. First, let me go ahead and create more cells. Okay, the iloc allows us access rows of data by using their index position. And when we talk about indexing, remember that when you are indexing a value, it begins at 0, right? So for example, if I want to access the first row of our data, I can say df.iloc, and indexing begins at 0, so you pass in your 0 to get the first row of this data frame. So if I go ahead and run this, you see we got just that first row where we have Alice 25 as age and New York. Oh, let me go ahead and just get our data set once more. So let me run this. Okay, you could see that we just got these first rows of data, Alice 25 New York. So just like the way we selected multiple columns, we can also go ahead and select multiple rows of our data by passing a list. So we can say df.iloc, and instead of just getting our first row where we use the index of 0, we want to get our first row and our third row. So since index begins at 0, our third row is going to take the index value of 2, right? So we'll pass in our list and the index values of those rows which we want, and we needed our first and third row. So let's go ahead and run this, and you could see that we got our first row, which was Alice, age 25, New York as city, and the third row, which was Charlie, age 35, and Tokyo as city. With the iloc and loc method, you can also select columns as well and specify the columns which we need. So I can say df.iloc will still return these rows of data which we selected already, but this time around we want to add a particular column which we need. So we need only the city column. We can go ahead by adding a comma and then the index value of that column name which you desired. Remember, iloc uses the index value integers only. Name here as the index value of 0, age as the index value of 1, and city as the index value of 2. So to get only the city column, we have to pass in the index value of 2. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so you could see that we got the city name for our row index of 0 and the name of the city for our row index of 2. Now let's go ahead and look and see the difference between using the iLook and the look method. Look allows us access data by the use of their labels or their names. So let's go ahead and print our table again so that we can get all our values first of all. So if you look at this table, you'll see that we have the names here or the labels of our columns, and these values here are also the names or the labels of these rows. So this is taking the row of 1 and it is labeled as 0. This is taking the row of 2 and it is labeled as 1. This is the row of 3 and it is labeled as 2. And this is also the name of this column and it is labeled as name. The name of this column is labeled as age, and for this column it is labeled as city. So we are going to use the names instead of their index values when using the .look method. If I want the first row, just like we did when we're using the iLook method, we're going to pass in the name of that data frame, pass in your look and a square bracket. So since we want the first row and the name or the label of our first row is 0, let's go ahead and pass in that value of 0 on it. So if we go ahead and run this, we're going to get same answer just like we did when using the iLook method. If we also want to get multiple rows of data, just like what we did when using the iLook method, we can pass in a list of those rows of data which you need. You first of all place in your square brackets. Now you're going to pass in that list you need. So we need our first row and our third row. So remember that these are our labels. So 0 is representing our first row and our third row 2 is representing that. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. So we got Alice and Charlie. So to select columns with our rows of data, we can also pass in a second value to select that specific column. So like what we did previously, df.look, open your square brackets and pass in the list of the names of those rows which you need. So it says our first row and our third row, add your comma. And now the difference between the iLook method and the look method, just like we said, the look method uses the names of those labels. So if we need the city column, all we have to do is to pass in the name. Okay, so city is our name of our column, and we're going to go ahead and run this. So we have New York and Tokyo. So I hope now you can see the difference. For iLook, we use the index value of those columns and rows, but for look, we use the names or their labels for the rows, the columns. Just like the way we can select multiple rows in our data frame, we can also select multiple columns also. So to do that, you also have to pass in a list of those columns which you need. So we can say df.look our rows which we need, add a comma, then go ahead and pass in a list containing the names of those columns which you require also. So this time around we need age and city. So let's go ahead and run this. So you could see we have city as New York and Tokyo, and our age value as 25 and 35. So now let's go to our survey and practice some of these things which we've done. Okay, so we'll be accessing some rows and columns of data in this our data frame. So let me go ahead and scroll down a bit and print out our data set once more. So name of our data set is data, and we'll be looking at the first 5 rows of this data. Okay, so let me go ahead and run this. So now you see that we got the first 5 rows, and if you see our data set, we have the response ID as our column 1, the main branch, employment, remote work, coding activities, education level, etc. So I'll go ahead and check the numbers of columns and rows of data we have in this data frame first using the dot shape attribute. So if I run this, you see we have 73,268 rows of data and 79 columns of data. So now let's take a look at all the response for the education level column. So to do that, we'll pass in the name of our data frame, a square bracket, and the name of the column which we want to access, which is our head level column. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this, and you could see that we got all the rows of data for that particular column. This deprecated it so that we can get the first 5 rows and the first last rows. So next, let's grab the first row and the second rows only. Remember to grab rows, we use the look and the iLook method. To do this, we can say data dot, we'll be using the look method, and we'll pass in our square bracket. Okay, since we are grabbing 2 rows, we'll be passing it into a list, and since we want our first row, and also we also need a second row, which is 1, and let's run this. Okay, so with this, we've been able to grab our first row and our second row of our data frame. If we want to grab those first row and second row for only the education level columns, we can also do that. I can go ahead and just copy this because we'll be modifying this code. So let me paste this here, and all we have to do is, after our list for our rows, pass in a comma and add the name of the column which you want the rows for. Okay, so for our head level education level column, we need just the first and the second rows. So if I go ahead and run this, you see we got those values. So if we look at this, for education level, we have missing value for our first row, also missing value for our second row. So just like we've seen earlier, where you can pass in a list to get multiple rows, you can also pass in a list to get multiple columns. So we can also say data dot look, we'll pass in our list to get our multiple rows, which are our row 1 and row 2, add your comma, pass in another list, and now this list is going to contain the list of those column names which you want. So let's say our education level column, and also we need the employment column. Okay, so we'll be using those 2 columns, and let's go ahead and run this code. So you can see now that it returned to us a data frame containing our education level column, our employment column, and just for those 2 rows which we specified, row 1 and row 2. If you are familiar with list slicing in Python, you can also do this in Pandas when accessing columns or rows of data in your data frame. So for example, you can see that for this we got just our education level column and our employment level column. So imagine in a situation where we want to get from employment column to the education level, we don't technically have to write in all the names of the column within this range. We can use our list slice. So to do that, all you have to do is to pass in the name of the data frame where you want to access values from, identify the particular method you are using, look or the iLook method, pass in your square brackets, and pass in the slice of those values which you need. So we'll be slicing for our rows also and our columns. So we need from our first row to our 5th row, so that will be from the value of 0 to 4. Add in your comma and also the names of those columns which you need. So we need from our employment column, and we want to go all the way to our education level column. So if you look at this code, take note that when you are slicing a data frame, you don't have to put in the object you are slicing in a list. Okay, so ensure that it is not in a list or it's going to give you an error. So let's go ahead and run this. So you can see that we have our rows from the first row to the 5th row. That's our first 5 rows, and we have only information regarding employment, remote work, coding activities, and education level. And if you remember, when slicing in Python, they usually said the last value is not inclusive in your slice. But when you are using the .loc method to slice, the last value is inclusive, because remember, these values you are using for slicing are not index values, but they are the names or labels. 0 to 4 here represents the names. So when slicing in Python, if you remember, it's always said that the last value in a slice is not inclusive, but when using the .loc method and slicing a data frame, the last value is usually inclusive, because if you take note, our slice here make use of labels or names, not index values. So our 0 to 4 here represents, these are the labels for these rows, these are the names of these rows. Okay, so it's only when you are making use of index value, that's when the last index value is not inclusive. But when making use of the labels, or when making use of the actual names of those columns or rows, those values are inclusive. So with this, I would end this video here. In our next video, we'll look at indexing in Pandas and other advanced filtering method. So remember to subscribe for more content like this. Like and share this video to your friends and loved ones interested in learning Python programming language for data analysis. And don't forget to drop your comments and questions in the comment section below. I'll do my best to reply each and every one of you. Bye for now, and see you in my next video.